Hello, boys and girls. This is Grandma Sheila, and my story today is called The Barn That Bloomed. Well, this story happened many years ago. Well, Jerry, seldom do you ever hear Jerry being the name of a little girl, but she came rushing into their house where she and her mom lived out in the country. And she said, "Oh, Mom, I just came by the Jimson's house. It's horrible, Mother. It has mud all the way around it, and the house is basically falling down all the way around them. And the kids, Mom, there's a baby all the way up to a boy of 12 named Tad, and Oodles in between. And Mom, their house is so bad, and their clothes, they look like the rag bag jumped up and got on them. It's terrible. I think we should do something about it, especially since Mr. Jimson died this week, and he's to be buried this afternoon." Well, she said all that in one big breath, and her mother looked at her and she said, "But Jerry." Well, now all the neighbors called the Jimson family the Weeds. Imagine having your children being called weeds. Mother said, they can't be much worse, because Mr. Jimson wasn't a very good provider. At least he did work some. He came and helped in our garden lots this last year. Mother said, "Yes, I know, but it wasn't much to make much difference for all those children and their little mother." "I know, Mom," Jerry said, but Mom, Mrs. Jimson is just plain discouraged. We've got to do something." And Mom once again said, "But," and Jerry said, "I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to think this out. I'm going to make a plan, because somebody needs to help the Jimsons." So that afternoon, she really did start thinking, what could she do? They needed a different place to live. They needed new clothes. They needed furniture. She thought and she thought, and then they had to walk to the funeral of Mr. Jimson, and then they walked back. And then all her thinking paid off. And she said, "Mom, I know what we can do. We have a barn that we never use. The barn is totally empty. There isn't even a cat living in it. And it's clean, and it's rain tight, and it has 2 rooms on the bottom of the barn, and it has 3 rooms in the top. Mother, it would make a fabulous home for the Jimsons. They could have a kitchen and a living room downstairs, and they could have 3 bedrooms upstairs." Now, you have to remember, in those days, people took baths in a wash tub, and they went to the bathroom outside in the outhouse. Well, all they would need was to make sure there was water for the kitchen. And then Jerry said, "And Mom, I'm going to figure out a way to get all that stuff. Now that I've thought of the barn, Now maybe I can think of what to do with the rest of the stuff. And then she said, you know, I have it. Auntie's big house has a big attic upstairs. And I know that it's full of stuff. Auntie's a good woman. I'm sure she would let us have some of it. I'll go tomorrow, Mom. Well, by this time, Mom had stopped saying but, and she got into thinking and help planning, and she said, I'll go right now to the barn this afternoon, and I'll get it all swept out so we can have it all nice and clean. Jerry said, tomorrow at the crack of dawn, I'm going to go see Auntie, and maybe I'll have to go see a bunch of other people too that might help us with this project. So as soon as the dinner dishes were over, Mother ran with her broom out into the barn. She opened all the windows. That barn had more windows than most barns do. And she opened all the doors, and before long you could see billows of dirt coming out of the barn doors. Excuse me. Well, Jerry, the next morning, she was up bright and early, and before the sun even had time to melt the dew off the grass, she was on her way down that road to her auntie's house. And when she got there, she knocked on the door. And Auntie came and said, oh, it's you, Jerry. Come in. Jerry just spilled out to her aunt. She said, the Jamesons. Oh, Auntie, I didn't realize that their house was all broken down and the kids only have mud to play in and they don't have decent clothes to wear. They're all rags. And on Jerry went, and Auntie looked at her and she said, they have all those little weeds. I guess all the neighbors called them, the children, little weeds. And Jerry said, I know, but even weeds need things. And by this time, Jerry had gotten so excited, she said, Auntie, I know you have a bed upstairs. Could they have the bed and maybe a blanket or two? Well, Auntie was soft-hearted inside, although she had kind of a gruff outside. But she looked at Jerry and she said, oh, all right, let's go upstairs and see what we can find. Well, when they got to the top of the stairs, Auntie said, I remember now, there's that bed over there. It was downstairs in your cousin's room, and she brought a brass bed and put in there, so I had this one hauled upstairs. You can have that for the Jimsons. And the mattress won't fit on any other bed but that one, so you might as well take that too. And if you go over, see that big wooden box over there with the latch on it? Lift that up. That's full of quilts that your cousin didn't want. Maybe you could take some up for the Jimsons. Well, Auntie was kind of getting into this, and before long, they had a substantial pile of things that could go home and be in that barn. Well, the last thing was that over in the corner, Jerry, she saw dining room chairs. She said, oh, Auntie, I'm sure they'll need chairs. And Auntie said, well, they need a little bit of repair. Well, at Jerry's house, they had a gentleman that came and did repairs and stuff for them. And she said, oh, James can fix them. Well, then, when they looked at their great pile, Auntie said, how are you going to get it all to that barn? Jerry said, I never thought of that. Oh, I'll have to figure out something, Auntie. I'll get back to you. I have to figure out something. And her aunt laughed. She said, you don't have to figure out anything. I'll have James bring it. He can hook up the trailer and we can sit those all on there. We have a big flat trailer, a farm trailer. And, you said you might go see some other people to see if they had anything to help. You just tell them the James will come and pick it all up. Well, Jerry was so excited she fairly flew down the road, and she stopped at the squire's house. And sure enough, they had an attic full of stuff as well. Down the road she went. Then, when she went to the following neighbor, she had remembered that they had just bought new bedroom furniture for their 2 daughters. And she thought, I wonder if they'll let us have it for the Jimson kids. And sure enough, they agreed. Pretty soon she had pots and pans, she had beds, she had chairs, she had a table. She went from place to place, and everyone, she said, and you don't need to worry about how to get it there. James is going to come get it. Well, by the end of that day, she was really tired, but she was so excited, she fairly flew home. And Mother, she had dinner ready by the time Jerry got home. And Mother couldn't even eat her mashed potatoes for listening to Jerry's story and all the things that she had gotten that day for the Jimson to put in that barn. And while she hadn't hardly finished talking, when who should come down the driveway but Mrs. Jimson holding her baby in one arm. She looked down and out. Her dress was a black dress that was dragging the dirt, that was too big for her and needed repair badly. And Jerry thought, I think it's too far gone to be repaired. But she didn't say anything to Mrs. Jameson. And Mother said, well, Mrs. Jimson, how are you? We were so sorry to hear about your husband's passing. Mrs. Jimson, she sighed again, and she sat down in the rocking chair. She said, well, I don't think it can be much worse than it was. That's kind of why I'm here. I wondered if you might have some work that I could do to kind of help with feeding the kids, Jerry's mother thought real quick and she said, I do. I have a job that you can do starting tomorrow morning. I need somebody to scrub the floors upstairs and downstairs in our barn. And Miss Jimson said, I may not look very strong, but I'm not lazy, and I can do a good job. Oh, thank you. So, with a new spring in her feet, Mrs. Jimson picked up her baby and started back up the hill, back to that old run-down place. Well, Jerry and her mom had agreed that they wouldn't tell Miss Jimson anything about the barn till it was ready for them to live in it. Well, Jerry was tired. She'd had a hard day gathering stuff to put in that house. After Miss Jimson left, she said, "Oh, and Mother, I saw Robin." Now, Robin was kind of disabled, but Jerry had been so excited about what all the other people had given her. When she saw Robin, she just had to stop and tell her. "Robin," she said, "I don't have much, uh, but let me think." And then she said, "But I do have something. Come in," because she'd been talking to her through the window. And so Jerry went inside and she said, "Go get in my top drawer. There's a little Japanese box with a lid on it. Open it up, and inside of that, you'll find a gold piece. Now, it was given to me last year, but I really haven't had any need to buy anything. So why don't you take that to the store, Jerry, and get some pretty things? Maybe some doilies or maybe material to make curtains with, something to spruce up that barn." Well, Robin was excited to be able to help. And so Jerry had said, "Oh, Mother, it was so wonderful." And then there was a knock on the door. Mother got up and she went to the door, and it was the lady that was the head of the church's society that helped the poor, the Ladies' Society, you know. Well, she came rushing in and she looked at Mother and she looked at Jerry and she said, "After all you guys are doing to help the Jimsons, us ladies got together and we decided, instead of making a huge box of clothes to send to the mission field, not that we won't do that, we'll do it later, but we've got a mission to take care of right here." So she said, "We'll get all the clothes together." And Jerry went, "Oh, that's wonderful. I forgot about clothes." A few more days passed while Jerry and her mother nearly worked themselves to death, making that barn look like a home. Pretty soon, James had indeed kept his promise and hauled all those things from the neighbors. They put the beds in the bedrooms. They put what living room furniture and chairs they'd gotten in the table. And matter of fact, the squire's wife had said, "I have a stove, that could heat and it could cook as well down in my basement. Now, it may need a little sprucing up." And Jerry had told her, "Oh, that's fine. I can blacken the stove." So they had a stove for heat. Pretty soon, that barn was all ready, and Jerry could not contain herself. She rushed over that hill and down to the Jimsons' little house, and she knocked on the door, if you could call it a door, and Mrs. Jimson came to the door, and she was smiling, and she looked so happy. And Jerry looked down. Her ragged dress was gone, and she was dressed in a pretty black dress. And then Jerry looked behind her, and there were all those children, from the baby in a pink check gingham dress all the way up to 12-year-old Tad. And the middle little girl, she said, "Oh, Miss Jerry, look, Look, the lady brought us all these new clothes, and Mama just washed us up and put on all these new things. Don't we look spangled and wonderful?" Jerry said, "You certainly do. And now," she turned to Mrs. Jimson and she said, "Mother would like you to come to our house now, if you could, for just a little while, and bring all your kids." And Jerry, she went over and she scooped up the 2-year-old and she said, "Come on, we're going to start out and go to my house." Well, when they got to Jerry's house, Mother commented on how nice they looked. My, they cleaned up nice. And the lady said, "The lady from the Ladies' Society came and brought us all these wonderful things." Well, Mother said, "You know, we have just made a new home on our property. We'd like you to come see it and give us some advice as to what you think about it." They didn't tell them that that was going to be their home, but they walked to the barn and Mother opened the door, and Mrs. Jimson, she looked at first one room, the living room, and she said, "Oh, look at that wonderful stove and the table and chairs. Oh," and Mother said, "Let's all go upstairs and look up there. There's 3 bedrooms up there." Although those bedrooms were little, they were totally full of furniture. Now, it wasn't a fancy place. Didn't have lots of things hanging on the wall and things. But Mrs. Jimson, she looked around and she said, "This is wonderful. Who's going to live in this?" Well, it was a natural question to ask. And Jerry, she stepped forward and she said, "Mrs. Jimson, this is your new home. If you'd like it, that is. And you can stay here as long as you want to, or as long as you need a house." I thought, Jerry looked at Mrs. Jimson, and she thought she might pass out. She was so surprised. And she kept going, "Oh my, oh my, it's beautiful, it's beautiful. How did this all happen?" And Jerry and Mother smiled and said, "Well, you know, there's a lot of good people around here, and they wanted to be of help to you. And Mrs. Jimson, this puts you close so that you can help Mother when she needs somebody, and she'll pay you." Mrs. Jimson, it was like she just couldn't fathom it. And you know who was the happiest that night? Oh, yes, the Jimsons. They, the children giggled and laughed and kept looking in every corner of that barn. And Mrs. Jimson kept saying, "I can't believe it was for us." You know, boys and girls, in the 23rd Psalm, it says, one of the lines, it says, "Thou shalt not want." Now, God could have sent angels down to do something with that barn, but He loves it when you and I help others. Thank you, boys and girls. I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.